Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating clash between the strict, rigid mechanics of the law and our most fundamental human rights. We're going to do this by looking at a landmark constitutional court judgment from South Africa, Singo v. the State. We'll explore how one ordinary guy's honest mistake rippled all the way up to the highest court in the land, and in doing so, challenged the very foundation of how justice is actually administered.
Now picture this for a second. Imagine missing a court date because of a simple, everyday scheduling mix-up. 2 whole years go by, you've completely moved on with your life, and then suddenly, you're arrested. But here's the real kicker. You're facing immediate jail time unless you can prove, right then and there, that missing that court date wasn't your fault. In this scenario, you aren't presumed innocent. You're presumed guilty. Crazy, right? Well, let's dive into how a system that was fundamentally designed to protect us ended up turning that basic right completely upside down.
Section 1. The Missed Court Date. So, our story begins with Mr. Maluto's Singo. He's an ordinary man whose highly relatable misunderstanding ended up triggering a massive constitutional crisis. Back in November of 1996, a magistrate warned him to appear in court the following January on charges of common assault and malicious injury to property. But here's the thing. Mr. Singo had actually already settled the dispute with the complainant. They had reconciled, so he genuinely believed they were just going to court to officially withdraw the charges. Because of that misunderstanding and a work trip that happened to take him to Namibia, he missed the date. Fast forward to January 1999, literally 2 whole years later, and Mr. Singo gets arrested, brought before a magistrate, and summarily sentenced to 3 months in prison. No option for a fine, just straight to jail. You're probably wondering, how on earth could this happen so fast?
Okay, moving on to Section 2, the summary procedure.
To understand how Mr. Singo was locked up so incredibly rapidly, we really need to examine the specific legal mechanism the system used against him. It's called the summary procedure. Rooted in Section 72(4) of the Criminal Procedure Act, its entire singular purpose is to prioritize speedy justice. Think about it. If people just routinely ignore their court dates, the whole justice system would grind to an absolute halt, right? Courts absolutely need a way to function unhindered by no-shows. So this mechanism completely bypasses the standard, lengthy trial process to deal with an absence immediately. The procedure basically unfolds in 2 very swift phases. Phase 1 happens the moment you don't show up. The court simply checks the record, confirms you are warned, and boom, they issue a warrant for your arrest. Phase 2 kicks into gear the second you're actually brought into the courtroom. There's 0 time to prepare a defense, no formal trial prep, nothing. The magistrate initiates a summary inquiry right on the spot and essentially demands an explanation for your failure to appear. So yeah, it's fast and it's definitely efficient. But as we're about to see, that kind of speed can come at a massive cost to fairness. Which brings us to Section 3, guilty until proven innocent. During this super fast courtroom inquiry, Mr. Singo walked right into a massive legal trap. Take a close look at the exact phrasing of the law here. It states that a person will be sentenced unless such accused satisfies the court that his failure was not due to fault on his part. That specific phrasing is absolutely critical. It meant the state didn't actually have to prove Mr. Singo was at fault. Nope. Instead, the burden was entirely on him to satisfy the court that he wasn't. So the very moment the state proved he simply missed the court date, he was effectively presumed guilty of a criminal offense. The absolutely crucial issue here is the massive difference between these 2 types of legal burdens. Section 72(4) imposed what's known as a legal burden, or a reverse onus. That basically means the accused has to definitively prove their innocence on a balance of probabilities. If the evidence is tied, or even if the court is just a little unsure, you go to jail. Compare that to an evidentiary burden. An evidentiary burden just requires you to hit the ball back over the net, so to speak, by raising a reasonable doubt. By demanding a legal burden, the law forced Mr. Singo to prove his own innocence, essentially breaking the golden rule of criminal justice. Let's look at Section 4, the constitutional clash. This reverse onus created some serious friction, elevating Mr. Singo's personal plight into the ultimate clash of interests. On one side of the ring, we have the state's necessity. The state argued, and honestly quite validly, that failure to appear in court severely hinders the administration of justice. If courts can't force people to stand trial, the public loses confidence, and the whole system collapses. But on the other side, we have the citizens' rights. Section 35(3) of the Constitution guarantees the right to a fair trial, the right to be presumed innocent, and the right to remain silent. The summary procedure basically told the accused, if you remain silent, you're going to be convicted. It forced them to speak up and prove their own innocence. So, the Constitutional Court had to weigh this incredibly heavily. Justice Ngogo really captured this tension perfectly. He noted that while the state absolutely has a pressing need to keep the courts running smoothly, this legal burden just went way too far. By forcing an accused to break their silence and prove their innocence on a balance of probabilities, it carried the totally unacceptable risk of jailing an innocent person. And even if it's a super rare occurrence, risking an innocent person's freedom deeply, deeply offends the fundamental principles of justice.
So, how did they resolve it? Section 5. The court's clever fix.
Ultimately, the Constitutional Court found the law unconstitutional. But, and this is a big but, they couldn't just throw it in the trash. If they simply struck down the law completely, it would create a really dangerous legislative vacuum. People could just skip court with zero consequences until Parliament eventually got around to writing a new law. The law was clearly pursuing a vital social concern, but the court realized the state could achieve its goal using much less intrusive means. So instead of destroying the law and leaving a massive gap in the justice system, the court opted for a surgical remedy. They used a legal tool called reading in. They decided to literally insert new words right into the existing legislation to save it. And here is that brilliant surgical fix. By ingeniously reading in just these few words, there is a reasonable possibility that the court totally transformed the entire statute. Now the law reads that an accused will be sentenced unless they satisfy the court that there is a reasonable possibility that their failure to appear wasn't their fault. With just those magic words, the court shifted that oppressive legal burden to a much, much fairer evidentiary burden. Now, a citizen doesn't have to definitively prove their innocence, they simply have to raise a reasonable doubt. This elegant fix saved the presumption of innocence for all future citizens like Mr. Singo. It ensured the state could still hold people accountable for missing court, but without completely trampling all over the Constitution. Yet, I think it leaves us pondering a much deeper, everyday issue. The Singo Plus reminds us that the machinery of justice is constantly trying to prioritize speed and order, and sometimes that comes at the very real expense of fairness. So, I'll leave you with this to think about. If justice must be swift to function effectively, how much of our own personal liberty are we actually willing to risk for the sake of efficiency? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and always keep questioning the balance of the systems that govern our lives.